Thank you for joining me. My name is Sybil Miller. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm the communications director for SisterLove here in Atlanta. And I am super excited to be able to come to you today to talk about comms leadership behind the scenes with some other social justice organization leaders. And let's jump right into it. What prompted me was last year. So let's talk about 2020. 2020 has actually been deemed as the year for social justice and change. And what a year it was. From a global pandemic from which people of color were affected disproportionately than other populations, to the murders of unarmed African Americans by police, the international Black Lives Matter movement, the targeted hate acts on Asian Americans, the increased number of hate groups in this country, getting the vote out for what is said to have been the most important election in 50 years, which, by the way, elected our first woman as vice president of this country, who happens to be a woman of color. There's no denying 2020 brought it all. And there were people behind the scenes that made sure you got your news that weren't always on TV. My esteemed communication comrades know a little something about these topics. Actually, they know a lot, which is why they're here today. And they know the responsibility of crafting the strategy and messaging for their executive teams in order to communicate effectively, in order to move their missions forward. That brings me to my panel today. So I'm so happy and so pleased to introduce Racine Tucker Hamilton, Vice President of Communications for In Our Own Voice, National Black Women's Reproductive Justice Agenda, LaTroya Hester, Director of Communications for the Center for Black Health and Equity, Nikki Metzgar. Did I get that right, Nikki? Okay. Communications Director for the National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum. Sisters, I am so humbled to be within your company. And you're here because I do value your opinion and advice from time to time. And we've collaborated on various initiatives from time to time. And so with that, I wanted to just kind of jump in and talk about have some conversations around social justice communications, specifically last year, but also what drives you. What actually led me to this forum were the conversations we've had independently about that very same topic. We basically don't have the luxury all the time to have the resources, or maybe any of the time, that our colleagues who work in corporate communications have. And I also feel that we have a deeper responsibility sometimes because of our messaging on who we represent. And so I wanted to kind of talk about that from all of your perspectives. So I'm going to start with you, Racine. Tell us a little bit first about In Our Own Voice and touch on some of the issues that you encounter or challenges. If you want to be specific to last year, it's fine. But I know last year just continues on for all of us. But we're interested in hearing some of that from you.
Thank you so much, Sybil. I am honored to be here with all of you. And I'm so glad that we're talking about this because, like you said, we don't get a chance to talk about it often. And I'll start with In Our Own Voice, National Black Women's Reproductive Justice Agenda. We are a Black women's reproductive justice organization, and we are a statewide partnership. So we partner with 8 other Black women-ran reproductive justice organizations throughout the country, and SisterLove is one of our partners, and we lift up the voices of Black women, femmes, girls, and gender expansive folks on policy issues that impact and affect us, and make sure that our voice is heard amongst our policy leaders, and with the hope to affect change and policy. And I think last year was definitely a year that many of us will remember. And I think for us, and for me and my team, it was just like the scrambling, trying to get everything in place. And the one good thing is that because of the digital platforms that we all work on and we use to communicate our work, we can be anywhere doing that. And I think we've all done that. We've all live tweeted from someplace. We've all posted to Instagram from someplace. So that part wasn't so hard. But for us, we do a lot of face-to-face interaction and communicating. And when I say my team, it's two other people, but we're like popping in each other's offices or each other's spaces. Okay, what do we think about this, et cetera? And to lose that, was a little bit of a challenge. And luckily for us, we already used Teams and Zoom and those platforms a lot already. So that part wasn't super hard, but just the, face-to-face contact was a little challenging. And then I think with last year, keeping up with the story. And in terms of social justice and the issues that we care so much about, every time, at least I feel like I thought, okay, we can catch our breath.
Yeah,
Something was happening the
absolutely.
next day. And it was all important. And we needed to make sure that, our stakeholders and our audiences were hearing our perspective and our voice on these issues, which meant, there were times, and I'm sure you all can relate, when we were like really operating around the clock because so much was happening around us. But it was important for us, particularly as a Black woman reproductive justice organization, that our voice was heard, and that we were making sure that our audiences, but also, members of Congress, policy leaders, et cetera, were hearing our voice and knowing that we were taking a stand on some of these issues as well.
You said that perfectly. And as you were talking, I'm watching LaTroya and Nikki almost simultaneously nod yes. So yeah, I absolutely understand that. I'm going to segue now to Nikki. Same question. Tell us a little bit about your organization and some of the high points or challenges or lessons learned.
Sure. Thank you so much. So the National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum, NAPOF, is a member organization that does community organizing and policy advocacy. I think the focus of our work is really building enough power, getting enough people, getting enough power behind us to influence decisions that are made over our lives. We are also a reproductive justice organization, and our three sort of issue areas are economic justice, immigration, and reproductive health and rights. And I would say everything Racine said rings true for me. I think a lot of it was, for me, maybe the pandemic intensified sort of existing issues, right? Like, yes. Journalism is changing as a field. There are fewer outlets. Reporters were so stretched thin, being traumatized through their own work. So trying to break through has always been a challenge, especially I think for Asian American and Pacific Islander women. We're constantly fighting invisibility. And then when there's just so much more intensity, the past 4 years with the Trump administration, there was, breaking news every day. That's a common thing that we talk about in communications, like things that we've forgotten about, you couldn't have imagined ever happening in the first place. So breaking through, but I think for me, I think what really has stuck with me is the sort of human resources element of it. I think, we're a team of 2 at NAPOF on our communications team, and everyone's exhausted. And I think we know that we say that, we know that, but then how do we actually adapt the work to that? How do two people, especially as women of color organizations, it's our communities who are being disproportionately harmed by a lot of these issues that we're working on. So how do you be a member of that community, then also be working on behalf of your community during a really, really challenging time? And so I've been really thinking about and sitting with well, how do we actually address that as a movement, as communicators? How do we rest? How do we care for each other and ourselves during this time?
And it's interesting you bring up the word resources, because that's really what we did. We turned to each other, and that sometimes is an even more valuable resource than anything you could buy. So for that, I'm very grateful. And last but certainly not least, LaTroya, I'd love to hear your perspective, and I'd love for you to go a little bit into detail about your organization.
Sure. So I'm the Director of Communications for the Center for Black Health and Equity. We were formerly called the National African American Tobacco Prevention Network. And this is important because we changed our name right in the middle of the pandemic, right in the middle of all of this. Because for the past 20 years, our organization was really focused on the #1 killer of African Americans. And we know that tobacco use contributes to all those sorts of heart disease and all that stuff, but there's a huge component inside of that really is a social justice issue. Why are there so many laws that are passed that are benefiting white communities but somehow don't benefit our communities? How are these opportunities being lost? And when it comes to our neighborhoods, how come these policies aren't being passed where we live? And how come there's always exceptions made? And so when you start looking at the social determinants of health and how that interplays with social justice issues, we began to expand our work outside of just tobacco, but also in HIV, and then also in cancer disparity. And eventually we're working on health disparities in general. And so we recognize that when you start looking at that broad sort of health disparities and the social determinants, now you're looking at gun violence and police brutality and economic disadvantage. And so when all of these protests were happening and we were very supportive, a lot of us were out there in the fight, physically there, but then having to come back to our desks every day and tell the story and remind people that there is a continuous correlation between the health disparities that we're seeing and the social injustices that we're having to live with every day. And our organization is, we serve people, Black people, people of African descent. We're all African American, or I always joke, all of us are at some part of us are Black, And so we have to deal with the personal trauma. Sometimes you just might be crying in the morning, and then you get to work, and everybody knows the news that came out today. And the beautiful thing about our organization is we already know that we've been in this fight this whole time. And all of the people here on the call, you're all dealing, the work that we do is social justice work. On the surface, it looks like policy work, or we're just promoting campaigns, or, we're really just in public health. But at the end of the day, it's all been social justice. And so this kind of compounds, but also affirms the work that we were doing. So we could, being in an organization like ours, we had the opportunity to pause and just, this meeting is over because we just need to talk about what just happened, and that was really important to us. But then when the pandemic hit, all of the work ramped up. A lot of people lost jobs, and we were grateful to not have lost jobs. But at the same time, our work ramped up. Now we have to make sure that this information is getting out to our communities about this virus. We have to think about how people are going to get tested. All of our people are the essential workers. How are they being protected right now? Are there services going into our communities? And so it was like social justice issues on top of issues. It was like the pandemic on top of a pandemic. And it's been a very stressful, emotional time. But I think being surrounded by folks like yourselves, it helps us to remember that, we are just continuously in the fight.
Very well said, and very true. I know personally, the lines of my real responsibility became very blurred. I felt compelled to get information out that I didn't really necessarily have to do. You know, it's as if I turned into that journalist I thought I would be. You know, I didn't hear it enough on CNN. I'm going to make sure we put that out on social media. I see a van going down the street that says free rides to the polls. I take that number down. I call that number and I say, hey, I'm going to link to your website. We're going to make sure that we put that on our website. I mean, I felt that there was a strong responsibility beyond what my job description said. And that was all year last year, from the time of, just as you mentioned, in the beginning of COVID, when all of us were like, oh my goodness, you know, how long will I be home? Oh, just a couple weeks. From the very beginning, it felt different. And it felt like we had a greater responsibility, which kind of speaks to, and Milo is fine, Nikki. He obviously has something he wants to get across over time. He could represent the pet population, I'm sure. But you know, as communication leaders, we have to be agile. We it's like you stop and pivot. You know, I think it was you, Racine, that touched on that. It's there was no time to really take a breath. The minute you thought that this issue was something that you touched upon, or you got the word out on, or you wrote a statement about, something else popped up, and it was of the same importance. I'll touch a little bit, if you will, for me, Racine, on what it is you feel or that you do to keep your leadership abreast. Do you find yourself sometimes at odds to say, I think we should be concentrating on this, or trying to be proactive and they may not see that? Can you touch on the challenges that comes with that responsibility?
No, never. We agree all the time.
Tell us the secret.
Yes, I jest. So I think, you know, obviously, like all of us, you know, I'm constantly monitoring the news and you know, keeping in touch with partner organizations, et cetera, about things that are happening all around the country. And I will say that our CEO, often when I go to her to say, hey, listen, I think that we really need to make a statement on this. Like, we are aligned a lot of times, but, you know, many times I do have to really overly, sometimes I feel like, justify why, but I think it depends on who your leadership is. And so for my CEO, she's very data driven. And so sometimes I try to have the data to back up what I'm saying, but also when things are happening and moving so quickly, the data isn't even out there and it isn't available. And it is like a feeling, it just comes from within you. Like, we need to, you know, have a voice on this. And one quick example I will give is, I was outraged with the disparities with the NCAA men's and women's teams.
Yes.
Outraged by that. And especially, you know, as I'm looking on Instagram and looking at these photos and these videos, and I just felt like, as Black women, when we look at the number of Black women athletes out there, we needed to say something about this. As a Black woman's reproductive justice organization, Black Woman Ran Reproductive Justice Organization, we needed to say something about it. So I was trying to gather data very quickly because it was happening over the weekend, really, so that I could send my CEO a text really quickly. But I knew I needed to have some data. It was hard to pull the data. I'm trying to pull links to pull into a text. And surprisingly, I'm like, okay, I'm just going to send this. And then, you know, I'll just pull data as I'm waiting for her to respond. She responded immediately and said, absolutely, we should make a statement on this. And so, you know, that's just one example. But for the most part, we do have to hash it out. And I understand that sometimes I just bring a lot of passion, like many communications folks, to the work that we do. Yeah. And I do appreciate sometimes when she's saying, okay, wait a second, pump the brakes, because, you know, we have to look at, all right, how can we say this effectively? Because, you know, we're C3, that's very real. And that, makes a difference. But I do feel like for the most part, we are aligned. And LaTroya, I think you touched on this a little bit, how at least for us, when I walk into the office or virtually every day, and to be surrounded by other Black women who are just as passionate as I am, the sell isn't as hard. But I know my job is still to explain why we need to have a voice on this particular issue, make sure our voice is heard, and make sure we're representing the voices of Black women that are silenced.
Yeah.
I love that.
I do too. And there's one thing I want to touch on, Nikki. I know that the last, I don't know, what was it, about 2 months ago, when here in Atlanta, when the murderer walked into those establishments and killed innocent people that primarily were Asian American women. That was bad enough. It was emotional enough. But when the news, or the hint of the news, was that we don't think this was a hate crime, I have to tell you, we heard that earlier in the year. We hear that all the time as African Americans. But are you kidding me? And then on top of that, he was arrested, not a scratch on him, brought into custody, nothing. And honestly, you all recall the headlines was one of the deputies or sheriff, I'm sorry, I don't have that in front of me, actually said, well, he was just having a bad day. I know how that made me feel. I'm interested in knowing how you separate emotion from knowing what you need to do to stay focused for all the tasks that you have to do in regard to that type of story.
I have to say that event was defining for my career. I mean, that was a challenge that I had never experienced before. I mean, I feel, lucky that I was in community with other Asian American women. And frankly, I'm biracial. I don't get the same racist, misogynistic comments that a lot of my colleagues do.
Mm-hmm.
So, that moment was so intense because the people that I was working with were really suffering, and you see it show in different ways for different people. Some of my coworkers really intensified how much work they wanted to do because it helped. Others, had a different reaction. I think, and also that moment was an unprecedented moment of visibility for our organization. I mean, I was on the phone fielding media requests for like 13 hours that day. I had never experienced something like that before. So it's almost like I just tunnel visioned, and it was like that for a week and a half. I mean, there wasn't really a lot of time to rest. So it's sort of like you're just taking in the pit, you're trying to like bail out your sinking ship and to just focus. I mean, for me, I just reacted with the focus and was trying to, I mean, it's personal, but for me, it was like, I mean, I am an Asian woman, but also I understand my role, and so I was trying to also act in solidarity with my colleagues and be supportive. Yeah, I'm still processing. I think it was a really big challenge, and it was also, I learned so much about. I mean, I know other communities, other organizations have sort of had this moment where something really tragic happens, and then they have to respond as professionals, and like nap offs, visibility, like, again, unprecedented. But then in a week, there was a mass shooting in Colorado a couple days later. And, we I was really proud of how we were able to, point out and say, this was not someone's bad day. This wasn't, it's not a coincidence that the victims were Asian American women. It's that they were not just Asian, but also women. And we really, I think we're successful in maintaining that drumbeat of that message. And we were like, thank you. There's visibility, tragically, on our community for the first time in, ever. And then it's gone. And then you're like, wait, we want some long-term investments in our community. So it's, since then it's been a real, like, how do we move forward from here? How do we demand the things that our communities needed before this and continue to need after this? It's more than just a past moment. So that's just been a real challenge and learning experience for me.
So what was kind of striking is that I recall this was very moving for me, as it was for a lot of people. So, the George Floyd incident that sparked Black Lives Matter, which existed before that, but never to the level that I saw or that any of us saw or experienced last summer, almost a year, or if not a year. I believe between the latter part of May and June were the most active months into the late summer. But you know what made me, and you said it perfectly, tragically, something came out of that. And what that was for me is to see all different races and ethnicities, ages, gender, all differences came together on that one time to say enough. And I cannot tell you how that moved me more than anything, to see that not just in this country, but in other countries saying the same thing. And I experienced that also when the tragedy occurred here in Atlanta with that particular incident, Nikki. We saw statements going out throughout the community, support, our Asian brothers and sisters, specifically support the Asian community, stop Asian hate. And I saw that in the Black communities. But I also saw during the height of BLM, I saw a lot of Asian businesses support BLM. And I think the bottom line for me is right is right. Has nothing really to do with, obviously I'm preaching to the choir, with color, or it's just what's right. And it's getting harder and harder to see and for people to understand that it's blurred, it's accepted to be blurred. It's just blatant denial, or just, I guess it's the audacity of it all that I experienced during the Trump administration that just took me to a different level of wanting to be committed to things that I knew were just right. And so when I hear what you say, I definitely understand how you have to take a deep breath and kind of separate what it is you're feeling, which, by the way, I do give credit to the drive sometimes, but you have to be professional and know you have a job to do, and you not only have a job to do, you're in a leadership role. And so, you have a little more pressure. So, LaTroya, can you share with us any particular incident that drove you, or that is similar to what we've been talking about, when you had to stay focused, but you knew that it was bigger than you?
Yeah, I mean, starting with Black Lives Matter, I think that, there was always this call for us to put out statements. And sometimes I would have to really think about, like, okay, it's like you said, we're going to put out a statement today, and then we're going to have to put out a statement tomorrow, and then we're going to have to put out another statement. And, as my executive director says, we've always been Black. So we've got a statement, It's like,
I love it.
it's like, this is our, this should not be, but this kind of has been our way of life. And so what that kind of does is gives us the liberty to think, okay, we could put out a statement, or we could release a poem, and we're allowed to do that because that's more that kind of sure, we're a national nonprofit, you know, CDC funded, whatever, but when we put out a poem, it's authentic for our organization, and it's the only expression that makes sense in the moment. And so we were able to do that kind of a thing. We were actively able, even before the shootings in Atlanta, and we did this during the you know, at that point. But also when we found out about how our Asian American sisters and brothers and partner sibling networks were being targeted when the coronavirus, when that whole thing first started, and then, you know, Trump was saying something about Kung Flu or whatever, all his nonsense, you know, we made it a point to be like, and hey, the same way that you all are here for us, we are here for you. Please let us know how we can partner, how we can support. And so just making sure that we are cognizant of our authentic relationships, because it's really real relationships. These are real, actual people. And we're all going through a real, actual thing. This is not just a political thing. This is not just a media thing, but this is an individual situation. These are our colleagues. These are our friends. These are people we go to conferences with. So you're there for us. We are just as outraged, and we put out our statements just like that. When it happened in Atlanta, those shootings, we sent out, this is hate, and we know it when we see it. We
That's
don't
right.
do anything. I mean, we try not to, obviously it's always professional, but we have the authority and audacity to be passionate and angry, because that's the way we want other people to react when we experience these kinds of things. So I remember that email that I wrote, and I just decided I was going to be angry. We know hate when we see it. We've seen it before. You know, here are some organizations that we support. Here's who you should contact. We reposted all of our all the statements that were being put out by our Asian American partners, and we were like, this is what it is.
Yes.
Calling everybody out, you know? And so I think
Unapologetically.
unapologetic,
That's right.
you know, because it's all anger inducing, and it requires and necessitates our passion and not watering things down.
Yeah.
And so I think, you know, and when it comes to that, that's a place that I feel very proud that I brought my whole self to the table. And then when there were other things that were just logistically going on, just with the pandemic, I mean, all of our partners had to pivot, right? Like all of our partners who were typically out there doing HIV testing, well, listen, now they're out there doing COVID-19 testing, right? And then those who were really on the ground training, they just did not know how to switch their trainings to digital formats. And so I had to advocate for a new kind of position to be funded in our organization, like a digital outreach person who could help people learn how to use Zoom. We had been working from home for the last 6 years anyway, so none of us were new to it, but our partners were new to it. They weren't really sure how to make that transition. They were thinking, how in the world could I ever do this work digitally? Or those who were used to just doing one kind of advocacy work, they took a break and just started feeding the kids, like meals for children, right? And so how can we take that and really highlight how the African-American community is rising to the occasion in the absence of leadership from the government?
Yeah, but that's
trying to be nice.
no, but you're spot on.
Yes, she is.
Victoria, and I'm sorry to jump in, Sybil. I just want
this is, please.
Echo what you said, particularly with the Atlanta shootings. We were doing the same thing, and Nikki and I, we work very closely together anyway. And so just to be able to say, listen, you know, we are here for you all. What can we do to support your efforts? Same thing. We released a statement calling it exactly what it was. And I think just switching gears for a quick second in terms of COVID, because like you said, LaTroya, the government was taking so long to act, but we knew in our communities, like Black folks were dying at alarming rates and not getting the care and the support and the assistance that they needed. So you know what we did? We started a COVID relief fund for Black women to help them pay their rent, pay their utilities, get diapers, etc., or whatever they needed, because the government was just not doing its job at that particular time. And we were paying the price for it, and we were seeing it in very real ways. And I do think it does make a difference when you can bring like your whole self to the table and be very unapologetic about it and be about this work to help save lives.
Yeah, because you know, the thing is, and it's so funny. So as we were going into the pandemic, it's funny because I've been working in public health for about 10 years, but there's still kind of an uncertainty or my mom wasn't even quite sure what it is that I did, right? I was like, yes, I'm in communications, but I work in public health. And when COVID-19 sprung up, I said, you know, Mom, it's going to be really obvious the health disparities that exist in the Black community right now, because I can tell you already, our communities are going to be the last to get tested. We're going to be the highest mortality rates. And my mom was like, no. I said, well, we have all the pre-existing conditions that are risk factors for severe outcomes with COVID-19. And she was like, really? Is that what you do over there? Like, is that, you know? And it was funny because we started to make these predictions. And in about 1 week, I remember after that conversation I had with my mom, about 1 week later, CNN started to report the numbers in the African-American community. And the thing is, that's why my boss always says, we've always been Black. We can predict all these things that are coming, and we know what our communities need, even before other people are making it public or making a big deal out of it. And so that's really our job, is to, like you said, Sybil, you know, put that out there. We can't wait for other people to put our stories out there. We can't wait for other people to sound the alarm. That's kind of what we're here to do.
You know, the interesting thing is, under the Trump administration, I felt I was on fire, always looking to get out something that I knew that they were suppressing that would be helpful. You know, I just felt like I was arm in arm with the real true journalists. And that was, I looked at as my role. You know, I listened more, I researched more. You know, I have to honestly tell you, sometimes you get lazy in this job, you hear something, and you just assume previous years. I think I could probably rest that that's accurate. I never felt that way during the 4 years of the Trump administration. I always felt like, oh, that doesn't sound right. Even if it was, I felt I needed to do more digging, specifically telling our stories. And I'm really proud to be able to say that I pulled from some early lessons to be able to do that. I mean, I think one of you said, it's like it's internal. It's like it's from the gut. You kind of know these things. And I really do feel part of being agents of change. And that's how I look at our role. We are agents of change, and our job is to communicate that. But part of that is that there's a psychology to it. And I definitely don't feel you can learn everything in a book. I think that a lot of our strength comes from experience, and also the ability to know and continue to learn, because communications is going to continue to learn, continue to change. And with that, I'm just throwing this out to anyone. How important, I should maybe use the word essential, do you find social media and a lot of these new platforms that are springing up relatively fast? every month there seems to be a different platform. I want to take this opportunity to say that the other face that's very silent on this call is essential on this call, and that's Bryson Edwards. He's our digital strategist, and you talked about that, LaTroya. I would have told you that there are most not-for-profits do not have someone in this role. I think each of us are different because we do. Therefore, we put a lot of emphasis on the power of not just traditional media. Obviously, social media reaches those that we're trying to reach, our audience. And so, pardon me for diverting a bit, but I'm going to throw that question back out. How essential is it to reach those that are depending on you?
Well, I will stand as someone who is either the oldest millennial or the youngest Gen Xer. And I'll say that social media is traditional media at this point. And we have to start thinking about it that way,
Mhm.
because when you're working for a small nonprofit and you're the only comms person on the team, nobody wants to respect the fact that social media is a full-time job. So if you want someone to do media outreach, to do strategic communications planning, to be, you know, writing press releases, to keep your email communications going, to write talking points, to prepare people for interview, but then you want them to run the social media, which at this point, we're talking Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Clubhouse, Snapchat, you know, which one did I miss? TikTok, because you really have to be relevant on all of them. Otherwise, you're going to miss very important pockets of your audience.
Your
Right?
demographics, you're right.
Right. Like every demographic's got a different, you know, there's some very young Gen Zers or old Gen Zers, young, I don't know the generations, but you know, they are
Not
done
that
and over with
big.
Facebook. They think it's ridiculous. Like, why are we even posting on Facebook? And I try to
Yeah.
explain to them that a lot of our public health professionals still use Facebook, but they don't want to hear it. They're like, why aren't we on TikTok? And it's like, we're a government funded organization. We can't just be on TikTok, you know? Like,
Yeah.
and, you know, you have to have, there's all these considerations. But my point really is that social media is traditional. It requires a full-time focus to stay up, to stay abreast, to keep all of your platforms going, to keep the engagement up. And it's really a way that you can stay, you can not only just putting out content and information, but you can be a part of multiple movements, because it's all up there at the click of your finger to be a part of all the movements. You don't have to miss out if you're willing to invest in the social media strategy. Like it's its own strategy and it requires tons of investment. So yeah, that's what I'll say about
It
that.
drives analytics. I know you wanted to say something, Nikki.
Oh, well, I love that social media is traditional
Is
media
traditional
now.
media. Yeah, that was great.
I mean, and everything you just said is so true. I mean, I've been doing communications for like 10 years. And I think in the beginning, I feel like people were just, oh, she's the youngest person in the room, so she can do the social media, which was like kind of
Guilty.
at the time, you know, it was like 2008. So like, but I mean, I think it is incredible. Like I credit me reading things on Twitter, being exposed to thinkers and writers and organizations and things on Twitter for like a huge amount of growth and learning for myself. So I definitely don't underestimate its power. I think such a hard thing about it is, as communications professionals, is convincing other people that I mean, exactly what you said. Not only is it a full-time job, but like it's a skill. I think people really just assume, oh, just write a tweet, post that tweet. Anything can just be a tweet. Just make it a tweet. It's like this backup tactic. Like, well, we can't do that, so it's going to go on social media, when it should really be strategized and resourced.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the strategy aspect of social media is so important, and we miss that a lot. Not us, but folks who like to tell us like how to do our jobs around social media. Because I think what's also happened with social media is, oh, you know, I'm on Facebook or I'm on Twitter, so I understand the strategy. No, don't understand that there is like a strategic level thought that needs to go into how we present, what we present, etc. And I also love that social media is traditional media. And I'm probably like the oldest out of the bunch here. And I do remember like back in the day when we would write our comms plans and we would write a separate social media plan. And now it's just, you know, conflated and integrated, and it has to be. And I think for me personally, like one of the challenges I have, like I said earlier, is, you know, I get so much feedback about social media and what we should be doing on social media, and, you know, just minus the strategy. And I am very lucky to have a digital strategist. And I think, as someone said, it's important to recognize that there's a skill set involved, and it's just not a matter of, you know, typing and pasting. And, you know, we just have to be very mindful of that as well.
What I like, I agree with all of you. I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I agree with all of your comments. What I like most about it is it drives analytics, which sometimes is a nice way of saying, told you. Back in the day, I don't know, Racine. I might have you, but I don't know. So we'll deem it a tie.
Yeah,
So-
because I don't think so, but yeah.
So I can remember always having to find a way to be creative to prove my ROI.
Uh-huh.
All my colleagues were able to give reports. Didn't matter. I wasn't always in public health. So I'm talking, large, very large corporations, and all directors would have to give reports, usually for the month. And I can recall this one particular position I had, uh, first Black person I ever had in the director's level in the history of this region for this organization. I will spare saying the name. It's a world known organization. And so I already felt that I had some pressure on me to make sure I was coming correctly and that no one did me a favor by hiring me. And so what I realized that all my colleagues would give these monthly reports and they would never ask me to give a report. And I went to my executive director and I said, hey, you never calling me to give a monthly report. Oh, if you happen to write a couple press releases, you can talk to us about that if you want, but it's not really necessary. I was like, oh no, see, I'm smarter than that. To myself, you must champion for yourself. You must let people know that communications absolutely affects your bottom line. And we just don't get the credit for it because we're telling everybody else stuff that they do and they get the credit for it. So they didn't have Cision that showed you tonality of your story and how far widespread your story went or how many papers it helped to sell. Or how your press release equaled what you would have spent for the same amount of publicity. I spent zero on a press release, yet if I'd spent the money for advertising to reach that same amount of people, it would have cost you almost $1 million or $500,000. There was nothing to monitor that. And social media really was at that time very, very new, still Facebook, like still for students and what have you, was kind of breaking out. I think the only thing I had then was maybe LinkedIn, which was respected as something that was professional. Everything else was social. It was not looked at like that. I'm so pleased to say that over the years, and it took about 10 years, but maybe 5 after we started getting these media software where they could actually track how much work we were doing. And with Bryson and the addition to our team, we're able to actually do that ourselves. I should say he is able to do that with social media. It tells you everything, what's trending, what's not, what our demographics, who we need to reach. And whomever touched on this was absolutely correct. You can line up all the platforms from here to the end of the room. You're speaking a little differently to each of them. You don't do what you do for Twitter, what you might do for TikTok, obviously. And so the key word here for us as leaders, to me, is strategy. And sometimes that's being just proactive enough to know you need a strategy. You're not just embarking on something because someone else told you. And there's research, there's so much to it. And I wouldn't change a thing. I know we're kind of like going forward as far as what we do. And it may sound like we're saying, we want more credit. I think you get into this business knowing that I used to say, if you do your job well as a comms team, director, what have you, you are unseen. That means you've done it all right because you didn't get the limelight because everything went right. And so it's almost, that's your barometer, so you stay kind of in the background and you're happy with that. I'm going to throw this out, but I have 2 questions that are a little personal. And I want each of you to answer. So the first one, and anybody can go. I feel like a teacher calling me, so I'm stop. The first one is, why do you do it?
I'll go first. So for me, the reason why I do this work, and I have been doing this work for more than 30 years. And I did start my career as a journalist, and I was a journalist for 10 years, mainly because I wanted to tell the stories of folks in marginalized communities, particularly Black folks, and folks who felt like they had no voice, and to make sure that their voice was lifted up, because I really do believe in the power of storytelling and that everybody has a story to tell. And oftentimes we know in marginalized communities, those stories are not told. And so that's why I do it, because I think it is so important for us to give voice for folks who feel like they do not have a voice. And we know that although it is a long, arduous road, that when we can give voice, change can come about. And so for me, it's really about like affecting change. And and I will say, and it's affecting change for Black women and Black folks, because that's where I bottom line. And that's why I do this work every single day. And that's why it's important to me.
Nikki, LaTroya. Either
So
one.
I will say two things. One, I think that whatever I'm going to do for 8 or 10 hours a day, if my kids are not right beside me, it better be for a very good reason, and it needs to have what we say in my religion, eternal value. And so I really believe that everything has to have a purpose. So you're not going to be spending my day unless there's some purpose behind it. And one of the things that drives me personally is, in the same way that you wanted to tell stories out of your journalism background, I have a really strong background in advertising, and I understand how media and media messaging can really shape the minds of people, which eventually shapes culture, which eventually shapes like values and the direction of the world and society and all that. And I just want to be a part of this big entity we call media shifting minds toward positive, good things, So that's why I do it, because I see the power of media in shifting minds.
I think I would just say, I think we all have our origin story somewhere. Like with some of the issues, I think for me, I mean, we actually have multiple origin stories, but I have when I was in my early 20s, not being able to get healthcare, really pissed me off, and I couldn't understand why the system worked this way. And so I think that personal experience, we're professionals in this space, but these things have happened to us, or we care about them because of instances in our own lives. And so I think that's what kind of like lit the fire under me. And then I also started my career as a writer, and I think you apply your skill set to the thing that you care about, and so that's sort of how it's followed for me. And the moments that I love are the ones when I feel like I've done something creative. I think, there's a lot of like analytics and media hits and political stuff going on the day-to-day of our job, but there's also a lot of capacity for creativity. And I think that's what is also very nourishing about the work day to day.
I love the word nourishing, because I do feel that for me as well, I think I do get it back. And I can tell you, it is also sort of a myth that you feel differently in the corporate world when you're working. I can tell you, I work just as hard, if not harder, in not-for-profit and public health as I did for when I worked for corporations. And perhaps the biggest difference there might be compensation, but you're compensated differently. And I think that's okay, because you have different phases of your life where you need different things to fulfill you. And I am right at the point now where I am perfectly fine doing the work I do for SisterLove. It's purposeful, it's meaningful, it's bigger than me. And I do try to keep that in mind every single day. Um, and that's what drives me. So, and I love, I neglected to say in the beginning that I named this session Immediate Release, Agents of Change on purpose, because I do see us as agents of change. We drive that change. What good is having solutions and having meaningful conversations if they stay in that room? Our job really is to take it from that room and get it to the folks that we know need it most. And so I'm very proud of that, and consider it an honor to work with others like me in that field. The last question I have is, I love this question, like, people, like, if I do this again, which I hope we can have like a part 2, and we can maybe just drill down on a specific topic for communications, because I think this is a great way of not only helping ourselves and kind of validating that the insanity is okay in the job, but I know that this is intern season. And do you guys, this is not what I was going to ask, but I want to bring this up. And when you're approached with by students that obviously want to work, especially now, there's like this new found buzz to work in, social justice. I find that one of the biggest things I want to do is kind of teach them a lesson that it's not what you think it is. It's hard work. And oh, by the way, I even still make copies. I still staple my own stuff. I do everything that you're going to be asked to do. And so I actually think sometimes if they had sort of an orientation of what it is to work in social justice, and it also takes a certain, I think, individual to work in social justice, even at an intern level, because I don't feel it's glamorous, but it certainly is rewarding. So I think these would be very helpful in that circle as well, in addition to our colleagues already working in the field. But so here's my one of my favorite questions, and it actually is, what statement or quote motivates or defines you, or speaks to you? And I think it was Racine that said, I have 2, and I get that, because it kind of depends on where I'm needing to, at what point I'm needing to draw my strength. On a more spiritual level, I probably have different quotes, but in this work, I have 2, and they're actually by the same person. And he's a white man. His name is Horace Mann, Horace Mann. He was an educator, an abolitionist. I love that he considered himself a reformer, which kind of speaks to why I like a lot of the stuff I read about him. And the 2 are, every addition to true knowledge is an addition to human power. But my all-time favorite by him is, be ashamed to die until you have won some victory for humanity. I must tell you, that is my absolute favorite quote, because that speaks to me. That still gives me chills when I hear that. It also kind of reaffirms that there are things that we're to do that are bigger than just us doing them for a living. So with that, I wanted to be fair and I kick it off. I'm going to leave open, jump in, or whomever wants to let us know what yours are or yours is.
Okay, I'll start again. So I do have 2 as well. Mine are Audre Lorde's, I am deliberate and afraid of nothing, because I do try to be intentional and very deliberate in this work. And you have to be fearless. And there are moments when that fear is there, but you still have to do it. And because it's important for us to get the word out and get this information out. And my second is a biblical quote. It's Matthew 5:37. Let my yes be yes and my no be no. And for me, I think, being able to show up as my whole, true, authentic self at work is not something I've always had the privilege to do. And I do now. And I am always intentional about my word is my bond. And, if you share your story with me, I'm going to take care of it. I'm going to share it in a thoughtful, meaningful way, etc. But my yes is always yes, and my no is always no. You never have to figure out where I'm coming from. If I have an ulterior motive, none of that.
Yeah, that's why we're like this.
I will share my quote. I can't say it's my favorite quote of all time, but I wrote it on a piece of paper that I keep on my computer. So it's been really guiding me. And actually it's from a horoscope, a Chani Nicholas horoscope, but it really meant a lot to me. So I will just read it.
Was it your horoscope?
Yes.
For your sign?
Yes.
Okay.
Care cannot and does not exist without boundaries. Saying no means knowing what my limits are. It's how I show respect for the resources in my life that aren't replenishable, like time. Each day I get to enjoy is one I will never see again. And that's just really meaningful to me because we've spent a lot of time talking about how we do this work because it's part of us. Social justice work is hard and comms work is hard. It's 24/7. You care about it 24/7, then the work is 24/7. And I, as I evolve, trying to figure out the resources are not replenishable. So how to keep forward in a way that's sustainable.
That's good. I wrote that down. Respect for my non-renewable resources. That's good. Well, I have two that I have just been keeping top of mind lately, one of which I don't know who said it, maybe Obama, maybe Alice Walker, but the saying that we are the ones that we've been waiting for. I think that as I'm getting older, I now realize that I can't keep waiting for other people to change the world or do something. Like something has to be done. It's like I told my husband the other day, I think we were complaining about some corporate policy or some problem. And I was like, we're the grown-ups. We can change it. We went out here and got these degrees. We're the authority. We're the ones. We're it. We get to say. And that gives you a great deal of responsibility and can be very scary. So the other scripture that I always have in front of me is Joshua 1:9. It's a scripture. And it says, be strong and courageous, for I am with you wherever you go. And that has had a lot of meaning for me for the past 3 or 4 years in particular. And if we're going to do this, we have to be strong and courageous. So, and we can't go it alone.
No. Which brings us to the end, but just for now. I can't tell you all how meaningful this was. This actually turned out much better than I had thought, because my initial reason for doing it was just to get some information out there as to kind of what it takes. But what I find, what I love is that there is truly a sisterhood and a connectivity. And that connectivity, I feel, between us, utilizing each other as resources, which is a strengthening, if you will. Sometimes the information is not the only thing you gain, it's the affirmation that you gain. And you're right. I said it earlier, and I'll say it again. I believe that the work chooses you. We just don't know that. And I don't believe in coincidences either. I think where you are, when you're there, for a reason. It's just up to you to figure out why. And that, to me, is the fun part, if you allow yourselves to be open to that. So I can't thank you all enough for the conversation, the sisterhood, the reminder of why we do what we do. And I have nothing but respect for you. And I think we are going to do it again. And this time, maybe we'll bring our social media backup partners into the conversation. Because with respect to where that has allowed us to go further than I think in years past, it's growing and it allows us to stay connected on many levels as well. So thank you all so very much. I really appreciate your time. I know you're all very busy, and let's do it again soon. Thanks everyone for watching.
Sounds great. Thanks, Sybil. Thank you.
Thank you.
pleasure.
Thanks, everybody.
Good to
Bye.
meet you all.
Bye, y'all.